who is the chairman of the American Red Cross. I would like also to welcome her very distinguished colleagues here, and I'm not sure I got Mohammed Al-Hadith, who came from Amman, especially for this. There was a wonderful event today at lunchtime at the Red Cross where David Metzer is going to talk about it. Before I give the floor to David, could I ask you to close all your cell phones, please, even our speakers, everybody, because it interferes with the live broadcast that we have and with the taping. David Metzer is Senior Vice President for International Services at the American Red Cross, an organization which is instrumental in supporting the joint admission of Megan David Adam and the Palestine Red Crescent Society to the International Committee of the Red Cross in 2006. And it would be wonderful if, Bonnie, later you could say how this happened, because it's a fascinating story. David Metzer's responsibilities include managing government and privately funded programs in over 30 countries, in addition to the ongoing $560 million tsunami recovery program, as well as overall responsibility for the international disaster relief activities of the American Red Cross and the dissemination of international humanitarian law in the United States. The format of this meeting would be as follows. David will introduce the speakers, say a few words about the award, introduce Bonnie, and then I have asked each of our speakers to speak for 10 minutes or 15 minutes about the nature of their work, what they do, and then we open the floor to questions and your comments. This is a live webcast, and it can be picked up around the world. And we then would put the program on our website, and we'll give you the links. So if you want to put the link on your website. So delighted to have you both here. David.
Thank you, Dr. Esfandari, and thank you all in attendance. As many of you may know, the Red Cross, International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement was born on the battlefield in the 19th century, well over 125 years ago. And today the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement is built upon 7 fundamental principles of humanitarianism, independence, neutrality, volunteerism, unity, and universality. And some of the fundamental principles in the Mideast are very, very difficult and challenging to live by every day. And what we at the American Red Cross want to do with the American Red Cross Humanitarian Prize is to honor and draw proper attention to individuals who are living the fundamental principles of the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. And we have our inaugural Humanitarian Prize was just awarded earlier today to the 2 gentlemen to my left, Mr. Yunus Al-Khatib, who is the president of the Palestine Red Crescent Society, and Dr. Noam Yifrak, who is the chairman of Magen David Adom in Israel, which is the Israeli version of the Red Cross and Red Crescent societies around the world. In the case of Noam, he leads what is today the largest non-governmental organization in Israel. As Noam will tell you, Magen David Adom has been around even before Israel's independence. Unfortunately, upon gaining independence in 1948, Magen David Adom, or MDA, was denied admission to the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, a privilege that is granted to one organization for each country which signs the Geneva Convention. For 58 years, as I said, Magen David Adom was excluded, and the American Red Cross was proud to fight the fight to help gain admission for Magen David Adom. And along the way, we picked up a number of friends and allies, both in the government, in the United States government, and certainly the current administration, President Bush and Secretary Rice, as well as Senator Clinton and others on Capitol Hill, very much advocating on behalf of MDA's admission. The Swiss government was certainly very helpful. Switzerland, as many of you know, is the home, the birthplace of the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. We also were supported by elements within the Palestinian Authority and the government of Israel, as well as other Red Cross and Red Crescent sisters and brothers, including we have here Mohammed al-Hadid, who is, as you heard, the chairman of the Standing Commission of the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. And everyone, and success truly has 1,000 fathers, but there are some fathers that, as I mentioned, really deserve the recognition. And there are two fathers here that deserve the most recognition. And Noam, on behalf of MDA, very much led the fight to both gain admission for MDA, as well as gain admission for the Palestine Red Crescent Society. One of the key elements of the success, ultimately in 2006, for MDA's admission was the willingness and courage of both Dr. Yifrak and President al-Khatib to sign an agreement between the Palestine Red Crescent Society and Mogen David Adom to lay the groundwork for humanitarian cooperation, to take a step that took some courage, to say that we will not be driven by the history, by the politics of our region. We will be driven by those fundamental principles and the desire to help people in need, whether they are Palestinians or Israelis. And this memorandum of understanding was very much a catalyst to what was ultimately a successful effort in 2006 for MDA to gain admission after 58 years of exclusion. And in the case of Yunus al-Khatib, the president of the Palestine Red Crescent, he too had the courage, despite criticism, to sign the memorandum of understanding, to engage in a partnership with Mogen David Adom in Israel. And in doing so, he and Noam committed to work with governments. In the case of Noam, to lobby his government hard for measures to implement the Memorandum of Understanding. And so we have today what I think are symbolically, as well as from a humanitarian perspective, very significant progress. There are 5 Palestine Red Crescent Society ambulances stationed in East Jerusalem with Israeli license plates, with drivers from the West Bank, but they function. They serve people. However, there's more progress to be made. And unfortunately, the political situation, as you will hear from Noam and Yunus, often does constrain or limit their ability to bring about improvements in humanitarian conditions. So today we honored Noam and Yunus really for their courage, for their willingness to stand up and do what is right in the minds, in the interests of people, to, despite criticism, despite opposition, to very much focus on the needs of not just Palestinians but Israelis. And so they are very much living on a daily basis those fundamental principles I mentioned at the beginning of the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. So in conclusion, I would like to thank both Noam and Yunus for their leadership, for their courage, and for their commitment to the fundamental principles of the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, and for frankly signaling that humanitarian needs do not always take the back seat to the political realities. That humanitarian interest, in fact, can be a bridge upon building a real dialogue and cooperation, despite very difficult situation. So with that, I'm going to ask Noam and Yunus to each speak for a few minutes about, as Dr. Esfandari said, what they are doing, what are some of the challenges. And then we'll open it up for questions. I think, it's an opportunity to learn about the humanitarian conditions, to hopefully, in our discussion today, avoid politics. One of our fundamental principles is neutrality. And it's less, while important in the grand scheme of things, of where the bullet or where the bomb came from, we're focused on the interests of the victim. That without regard to the politics, we in the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement will help the victim.
David, before they speak, I would like to give the floor to
Yes.
Bonnie for a few minutes. I think it's very important.
Thank you, Holly. And thank you, David. And again, congratulations, Noam and Yunus. And again, we're so honored that our friend that is the chairman of the Standing Commission, Mohammed Al-Khadib, is here today. And also we're delighted that we have our new CEO, Gail McGovern, and here with us as well. My engagement in this was really that when I came to the Red Cross, I had no idea that Israel could possibly be excluded from the International Federation. And as I learned about it, it sounded as if there were many starts and stops, and there were some opportunities at different points over the last 58 years where it appeared that Magen David Adom would become a part of the International Federation. But I was also impressed that with the opportunity of bringing both MDA and the Palestinian Red Crescent Society into the organization simultaneously, I think it sent a message about what the real purpose is of a humanitarian organization, to overlook all the history, all the perhaps biases, but to realize that we had a chance to actually to fix a wrong, to right a wrong. And there are many stories I can tell you, and I don't want to take the time away from these two extraordinary men. But I did have the privilege of being on the phone one night, and with a little telephone diplomacy as Noam Frank rang me up from Geneva. It was 6 o'clock my time. I think it was about midnight his time, asking for assistance. Now, I have to say, when I put down the phone, I thought, oh my gosh, who do I call? And so one of the things as a former ambassador, you do still keep that call for the White House that says an emergency room, and you can find to someone anywhere. So we started calling individuals and ended up talking to 5 or 6, 7 people. I'm happy to report, after all those telephone calls and conversations from everyone from our UN ambassador to Geneva to folks in Israel, that we had a wonderful and significant development in that Prime Minister Sharon agreed to sign the Memorandum of Understanding, so that day in Geneva, the Palestinians who would have been there allowed the Israelis also to be there as equal partners and to sign that Memorandum of Understanding. I think from my standpoint, I do believe in divine intervention, and the reality is we had a window of about 2 weeks, because 2 weeks later Prime Minister Sharon actually became quite ill, had a stroke. And that opportunity to seize the moment after these 58 years was held in those few moments. So I'm happy to report that I got awakened at 1 a.m. in the morning, or 3 a.m. actually, my time, from Geneva, saying that they had met and announced and signed, and the New York Times was there, and CNN, and they were all there to cover this big event. But I think the most important thing is that the discrimination stopped against Israel, and the inclusion began for the Palestinians. And when you look at the work of the Red Cross, people think of us in many cases being there for disasters and for blood, but I don't think that people always recognize that we are also a humanitarian bridge. And I think in this case, we helped, along with many partners around the world, to create a humanitarian bridge that these two gentlemen cross now every day as the needs of people who are, in many cases, quite ill, didn't have the resources or didn't have the availability to access care, now have these two wonderful gentlemen to represent them. I did hear on the floor in South Korea, I heard Eunice say, if I am for Israel, who can be against us? And I've heard Noam call on the floor in Geneva that Eunice, my brother, we have succeeded. So I think this is the highest form of what brotherhood is about, is that we are helping complete strangers to improve lives and to save lives. And my understanding is also, Eunice, and correct me if I'm incorrect, that this is also the opportunity, first official membership of the Palestinian Red Crescent Society in recognition into an international organization in recognizing Palestine through the International Federation. Is that correct?
First time for Palestine ever in any international organization.
Any international. And I think we're very proud that the Red Cross and Red Crescent Society were facilitators for that. So congratulations to you both.
They get along so well. They're each saying, who wants to go first? So, no one, please.
Okay. Good afternoon. Magen David Adom, it's the largest EMS organization in Israel. We provide 99% of the blood to hospitals and 99% of ambulance services in Israel. We have 1,500 employees, 10,000 volunteers. Our budget is around $110 million a year. We serve 7 million people, Jews, Muslims, Christians in Israel. And we have a commitment to the population that we will be in any apartment in 7 minutes. In any place, in any apartment in Israel, in the small villages or in the city. In 7 minutes we have to be in them apartment if something happened. We signed the agreement with the Palestinian Red Crescent Society. The first part of the agreement was that we declare as a Red Cross Society that the occupied territories by Israel in 1967 are the jurisdiction of the Palestine Red Crescent Society. We are not politicians, it's not our, we don't define borders, but between the societies, yes, we define the borders. And the second part was that the Palestinians ask us and we accept to represent them humanitarian needs to the Israeli government, to lobby and to do advocacy to them needs, and we do it every day. Our staff and volunteers are near the checkpoints 24 hours a day, and it's not easy to stay in nowhere during the night. It's very difficult to stay there, but we are there because sometimes during the night the Palestinians need us. So whenever the Palestinian people need us, we are there. Whenever the PRCS want us, they call us, and when we need them, we call them. There is a lot of time that Palestinian staff and volunteers save life of Israelis in a car accident. They arrive before us, and they do a great job. So, as David mentioned, the Palestinian Red Crescent Society opened a station or main station in Jerusalem. They operate them ambulances in Jerusalem with them emblem, with them name, Palestine Red Crescent Society in Jerusalem. They operate it in East Jerusalem, but they allowed to go anywhere in Jerusalem because they provide ambulance services. We have a very good cooperation between us without political borders or any problems. So this is it. If you have question after, I will answer.
I'll try my best also to be as short as now.
You can be longer.
Give you more time for questions and interventions, because we'll be missing so many things I think that you have in your minds to ask. The Palestine Red Crescent Society was established in 1968. It was mainly maybe a result of the 1967 war and to meet the needs of so many refugees and those in need of the help that a Red Cross Society can provide at difficult times like conflict. Although throughout the last century there has always been Red Crescents here and there in Palestine. The first was established in 1915, and then again in 25 and 36 and 52. Actually, the branches we have now in the Palestine Red Crescent Society has been there since 1948. Some of them are older than the National Society itself. The National Society was the umbrella organization for all those branches that existed at certain time between 48 and 67, actually under also the umbrella of the Jordanian Red Crescent, as Jordan was administrating the West Bank. And there was also a branch in Gaza, which was not part of the Egyptian Red Crescent, but it had a different legal status. We have grown up since 68 to be a giant organization, maybe. We have around 4,000 employees, 20,000 members, 10,000 youth in our youth section. We work in several countries to address the needs of the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, and in Egypt. We run a number of hospitals in Lebanon, 5 hospitals, I think, in Syria, 3 hospitals, a medical center in Baghdad. The Red Crescent, Palestinian Red Crescent, myself was the first after the beginning of the war, 2003 in Iraq, to go and after the toppling of the regime, actually, and address the needs of the Palestinian refugees in Baghdad. In Egypt, we have a hospital. In Palestine, also it's a huge operation. We have 6 hospitals. We run the national system of ambulance system, like MDA. That is mainly the similarity between us and MDA is we are the first responders to any emergency. What we are proud of as the Red Crescent, actually, the last 10 years we have been focusing a lot on our community work. And this is why we have seen an influx of young people coming to the Red Crescent. And 10 years ago we had maybe 500 members in our youth section. Now we have over 10,000 members. We are proud of that, because that creates also an avenue for young people to provide meaningful services to their community rather than doing other things. The other program that we have expanded is the PSP, psychosocial support, which is very much needed. We work very much at schools. We cover tens of thousands of children with this program. It works with the families, parents, and with the teachers mainly, not directly with the children. But with the children, we have recreational activities, programs, but a lot of training takes place with the teachers and the parents to accept how to deal with the children under conflict. And we use a program or a definition used very much in the movement called KABAK. I don't know what does it stand for, but it's something to do of dealing with children under conflict, something like that. It is a standard program in the movement. Our other program that we are very much also proud of is working with handicapped people. This is our largest program. Not just we are providing services and focusing on children in this, but also we have developed over the last 20 years a university college, the first of its kind in Palestine now, that provides training with a bachelor degree for what we don't call them, although the Ministry of Education refused to certify the program because it's called ability development. And it is a general program that tries to work with what is left of your abilities and develop them, rather than working with your handicappedness and try to help you. So this is how much it is rooted in the society. We have provided the first we focus a lot on deaf and dumb people with hearing impairment, and children specifically. We have a number of schools now in Palestine accredited by the Ministry of Education that provides full curricula certified for these kids. This year we have the first school in Palestine that graduates these kids with a higher certificate, higher tawjih, high school certificate, and then they can get it to university. We had the first batch of students, 5 this year, to graduate as secondary or high school graduates. And this is a success for Palestine because and these people really are normal people. What they lack is just hearing and ability to speech. Mentally they are perfect, and the community can use them, and they can be productive in the community. You just have to give them a chance, and that's an area we very much focus on. We work in primary health care, community centers. We work in, we have a division of labor between us and our branches. Branches also work in other issues like women training centers, orphanage centers, and elderly centers. So those are run based on assessment at local level. If there is a need, then they develop their own programs at branch level to serve their own communities. Finally, the challenges we face as a Red Crescent society. Well, that is a challenge when you are under occupation, and then security becomes, as Naum, my friend here, says, it becomes the priority. And when security is the priority, I think we are the first in the humanitarian sector that suffers from this, because we need free access, we need quick movement, transfer of goods, and medical supplies, relief items, and so on. With the closures at Gaza, difficulty of moving, we're having tons of medical supplies need to be moved into Gaza, with having the separation wall, creating so many communities. Till now, it is accounted to be around 10% of the Palestinian population isolated in small communities around this wall with limited access time. There are gates to these communities that opens twice a day, and we try to serve these communities through mobile teams that need also prior permits to get into these areas. To make it a bit simpler, as the World Bank has described it, in the West Bank there is what was described as the closure system, closure and control system. It breaks the West Bank into 8 cantons through checkpoints, a whole system, structure of system for permits to move between these 8 cantons. It does not only restrict movement of medical staff and humanitarian teams, but also of the economic life in the West Bank. Of course, there are other smaller challenges, like the idea of the Memorandum of Understanding, which was signed between MDA and Palestine Red Crescent. And I think that this is where Naum, and in his capacity as chair of the MDA, has proven bravery in being the first ever to sign really a document, legal document, that in essence it does recognize international legality. It does say, when he talks about the borders between us, does say, well, the occupied territories as defined by the international law, as defined by the UN, it is the geographical scope of the Palestine Red Crescent to work under. And that never happened in any document or even negotiations. Well, I think that was easier for us because the humanitarian imperative was our main concern. We hope politicians can take that into account, but of course they have other priorities in their agendas than what we had. That worked well, although there are a lot of things still to be done, to be implemented, to improve. As I said once, the MOU addresses only about 10% of the overall humanitarian needs of the region. Really, it's mainly to talk about access of medical missions, access of ambulances to serve needy population, and not really to talk about other humanitarian issues. And this is why I declared in the last international conference, the minute we finish up implementing this MOU, we will be signing a new MOU that will address other issues that other populations are of need to address. Of course, membership, we have to, the leaders here who really worked very hard for both organizations to gain membership, Dr. Mohammed Al-Hadid and Boni. Of course, also when it came to implementation, Boni twisted a lot of arms, I think, and maybe next, I don't know. It was a tough fight, really. Just as one of our colleagues, I think he was from one of the Scandinavian countries, said it in a very sarcastic way, we had to have one diplomatic conference, diplomatic conference where the governments and the national societies meet once every 4 years. And we had 2 international conferences just for 5 ambulances to be operated in Palestine. That is too much for the whole world to meet 3 times to make 5 ambulances operate. But for us, that made the world, because it did improve the lives of so many, and we were able to reach so many who were in need for these ambulances. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Been longer, maybe.
Thank you. No, let me start with a question to you. Yunus talked about the challenges that he is facing, and he also was facing probably when you decided to sign the agreement. What sort of challenges do you face cooperating with the Palestinian Red Crescent?
It wasn't easy to pass an agreement or a declaration that we declare that the occupied territories by Israel in 1967 are the jurisdiction of the Palestinian Red Crescent Society. It wasn't easy, specifically when we have a lot of staff and volunteers who live in the West Bank, who has right to vote against me. So it wasn't easy. But we convinced the people that it's not a political declaration. The politician, and we sign also about it, that we will respect our politician decision. I will respect the Israelis, and he will respect the Palestinians leaders. And the most difficult issue was the 1967 borders. And Yunus, without it, he will not sign. He didn't want to sign the agreement. And for me, it was difficult to pass it, but we achieved it. And now they have a station in Jerusalem, which is also demonstration of borders between us. The politicians, they can do whatever they want. It's important that on ground they operate with them emblem, with them name, and the Palestinian people who live in Jerusalem call them and ask them to assist, and not they don't call MDA because they want the service from them people, from the Palestinian Red Crescent Society. So the major part was, the major difficulties was the declaration and the question of borders.
I'll now open the floor if you have any questions and comments. And Yes, please. Just wait for the microphone, please. Just go ahead. I don't think they can find the microphone. No. Okay, they did. Please.
My name is Mary Mullen, and actually I work with the Bosnia Support Committee, but I follow the Israeli-Palestinian problem. I've heard many human rights groups from Israel and Palestine that would to me seem to be a lot of help to you, because they seem to really be able to speak out and not afraid of politicians. And I was wondering if this is true. I've heard them speak, and are they actually helpful to you?
You are very much right. There are several Israeli organizations. One of the most prominent is Physicians for Human Rights, that has been, and B'Tselem, that has been instrumental in documenting violation to international law. And you know, they very much work under international law, international humanitarian law, more than human rights, although they are called human rights organizations, because that is the international humanitarian law is the applicable law to the Palestinian situation as it is under occupation. And these organizations very much document violations against international law more than human rights doctrines. And they have been instrumental also in raising several Israeli high court cases, and also successful in it. For example, once they managed to succeed with an Israeli court law order to stop using civilians as human shields, and that was very important because they managed to get photos of Israeli army putting children in front of their jeeps before entering a village or whatever, and they got the photos, they made a whole case, and the Israeli higher court they ruled against the army in this. In several cases, like when there's confiscation of villages' lands, villagers lose their lands, and with the separation wall, wherever it passes, a lot of land goes. They managed also several times to change even the route of the wall by court ruling. So they are very active and instrumental in really winning some cases. That gives you hope, that you can do more.
I got the. You want to add something to that?
Yes,
please?
we don't use this organization. They only monitoring the situation, and we act on ground. So we have not a lot of connection with them, but I know that they are more useful for the Palestinians. That they monitor the situation on ground, and we operate on ground.
I got a sense by listening to both of you that your duties or your functions are very specific, while when it comes to the Palestinian Red Crescent, you deal with schools, you go beyond what one expects from a Red Crescent association. Is that normal, or you just because it's the situation on the ground that you are doing all these different things?
No, it has been normal now in many Red Crosses and Red Crescent societies, as the capacity is there in many of these organizations. And there is, we are not always in conflict or in disaster. So just to keep to the original mandate of the Red Cross movement, that we are only there to intervene in conflict, as it happened in the past. Many organizations now get out from the blood transfusion services, as Red Cross and governments are taking that over. Many Red Cross, Red Crescents are involved in these activities. One of the objectives of the global agenda of the Red Cross movement is community work and utilize our resources to help those in need. And it differs very much from developed countries where governments really provide most of the basic services, like primary health care. Why should we provide primary health care to our communities? This is the responsibility of government. But when you are in a country where we say the Red Cross or Red Crescent, they fill in the gaps where governments cannot come in. So we try to come in as auxiliary to the government to do that. What I would like also to comment again on that notion you have said, there is a difference also between human rights organizations and Red Cross, Red Crescent organizations. Although they have the liberty in doing what they do openly, sometimes, although we know these things happen, and we have in the Red Crescent we have a lot of documentation on the violation, but we are in the Red Cross a bit more discreet in how we deal with this. We give it, for example, in the Red Crescent, we give it to ICRC to look into it. We use the good offices of MDA to investigate these things or to advocate on our behalf with the Israeli authorities. But rarely we go public saying, well, this is what's happening. Human rights, this is why, and we never went to higher court, for example, in Israel. But with Salem, they do it very often.
I just wanted to say that I think one of the things as you listen is Eunice's responsibilities. I think of him as almost the Minister of Health in his own country. That he does many, many areas, including the Ministry of Health, because in his country, as he said, they don't have all the development there. They have the needs. And so the humanitarian organization led by this great man steps in to do what's necessary. But you're right, Holly. It's not what we would consider at the American Red Cross as far as our kind of responsibilities. Ours are more defined, although some of our chapters have their own ideas about what the Red Cross is about. So we see some of that out there. But I think Eunice is an example of many other examples, and David, you may disagree or agree with that, but we see that many of the movement representatives or presence in their countries are in essence have a very high stature that is responsible for far more things than you might assume a Red Cross would be engaged in.
We are more Americans when we have to specify it in one field or two fields. Our field is ambulance services and blood services, and we don't touch any other fields because we want to be a professional in that fields. I'm sure that in 20 years, 30 years, also the Palestinian Red Crescent Society will take one or two or three fields and will not touch any other field. We will leave it to the government. But now when the Palestinian Authority has a lot of problems to solve, they took upon themselves to provide another normal services that the government has to provide.
Okay. And the funding, where does the funding come for both your societies?
Want to start with the money?
Yeah, you can start.
Well, traditionally we had three sources of funding. First one, which constitutes around 25 to 30% of our budget from the government, Palestinian government. Then we had a lot of joint programs from international funding, either through joint Red Cross, Red Crescent activities, programs. With ICRC, ICRC literally covers 80% of our ambulance system running costs. Joint programs with international organizations, UNICEF, UNDP, WHO, international NGOs, not international NGOs, I think what I meant is like Spanish NGOs that work internationally, or Norwegian or Swedish, sometimes American. Then the third, I think, portion comes from fee-for-service. That's our income-generating programs of the National Society. Our main weak point is the government funding. That is because it fluctuates, and when there was an embargo 2006, 2007 on the Palestinian Authority, when Hamas won the elections, then we had to go out in a strong appeal, because that meant most of the government funding constitutes nearly 60% to 65% of the salary bill of our staff. And that was a disaster for our staff, that we cannot pay the salaries out, so we went out for an appeal. Luckily for us, fortunately, we are a member of, as we said, a great movement. Many of our sister societies came forward, including the American Red Cross, to support this huge bill. That meant raising nearly $1 million every month. That is a lot for a society like ours. Our budget overall is around $40 million a year.
No.
The major part of the financial support we get from I don't know how to say it, but the people pay fee for service. The minimum is $100 for any ambulance transportation, and the hospitals pay for the blood unit that we provide. And we have friend society in all over the world. We have in United States, American Friend of Magen David Adom. They raise around $20 million a year for us. As you remember, I said our budget is $110 million, so it's a lot of money. We have a friend society in Switzerland, Germany, England, France, in all over Australia, South Africa, and the biggest donors are Jews who live in the diaspora. Our biggest donor is Mr. Bloomberg, the mayor of New York City. And we use the money for the people of Israel and for the Palestinians.
Yes, please, just take them.
Amanda Pope, I'm with USAID. I was just wondering, you spoke of the difficulties and conflicts you faced in signing the agreement from a political position. What about at the local level? Did you see any resistance there? And once the agreement went through, what was the response?
You ask me?
Both of you.
Both
okay.
of you.
From both
Why
sides.
don't you start now?
Okay. In the local level, we find some difficulties in our Jerusalem chapter, because we have a lot of Muslims, volunteers who live in East Jerusalem. They are volunteers of MDA, and they was afraid that some other organization, meaning the PRCS, will take them place. They want to serve them people in East Jerusalem with our ambulances, with the MDA ambulances and MDA system. And now we brought another organization who will concurrent them or will take them place. But finally we solve it peacefully, and everybody work together. And sometime the PRCS took our volunteers to work on them ambulances. So we solved it well.
Well, on our side, I think the signing of the MOU came at a very difficult and confusing situation or time. And when we had the Palestinian elections and Hamas won power. So when we signed it, it was still the old government before Hamas. So it was supportive of signing the agreement. And then a few months, or only 2 months later, there was a new government, the Hamas government. It was very much because we were preparing for the international conference in June. The elections were in January. And then it was the Hamas minister who need to prepare for this international conference. So it was an issue, became an issue, what to do about this. And I remember I was in the international conference. We had it in June 2006. And I got a summon to be summed up to the Legislative Council, that is our parliament, to justify what I'm trying to do. I got threats myself. Some leaflets were distributed against what we are doing. But believe me, as I got back, I went to the Legislative Council. I asked for there is a committee called the Committee of Social Health Issues, and it is made up of the different parties. Thanks God I have a good way of convincing people, and even the Hamas members voted for my report to the... so it was a convincing report that this was something humanitarian-wise we'll all benefit from it, and we need all to support it. There is a story I would like to tell when it comes also to the Israel side. And, there are always people who don't... generalizing things is not easy. I remember a story when once we saved the life of an Israeli woman. She was an Israeli settler. And this car accident happened just outside Jerusalem, in the main road. And we called the MDA. There was a close by car. They did not have the equipment to carry this very hard case. So they asked our people just to carry her to Hadassah Hospital. At Hadassah Hospital, the security men, there's a security gate. They did not allow the ambulance to go in. And they tried to convince them this is an Israeli citizen and she needs serious condition and needs care. They refused to let her in. This is how they think. Sometimes some of these security people, think so narrow. They took her to a Palestinian hospital. The doctors did whatever they can, but they told them we don't have the specialist to operate. They needed a neurosurgeon for the case. Then when they went to another Palestinian hospital, they could not. Because the streets of Jerusalem is scrutinized security-wise, a police car stopped this Palestinian ambulance, wandering around the streets of Jerusalem. They told them, what are you doing? They said, we have this Israeli case, and Hadassah does not accept it. So they immediately escorted. The difference between this team of security guys and the other team of security guys, and at the gate of Hadassah they were quarreling. The Israeli police want to get her in, and the hospital security people don't want her in. Until now, and Naom knows, and we are trying to get this worked out with the GPS system, so that the Israeli security people would monitor our ambulances where they are in a GPS system. We get a case to the gate of the hospital. Because we cannot get to the entrance of the emergency room, which could be only 10 or 15 meters away, we need a pack transfer of the case. So another ambulance has to come from the hospital to pick the case and take it in. And we say we are happy that at least we have the ambulances there to do the job. But we still have to work a bit harder to change these obstacles that they are just You know, they don't need to be there because of one security guy who thinks this is the best. Even at checkpoints, you know, they don't all think the same. Somebody will tell you pass, the other will tell you stop.
Yes, please.
Al Milliken, American Independent Writers. Historically, when did the Red Cross first start using the symbols other than the cross? And has the use of religious symbols caused any objections or controversy?
Yes.
Why don't I take that, and certainly I have a number of experts, including Dr. Al-Hadid, to correct me if my history is wrong, but when the International Red Cross was established, the symbol was the Red Cross, which is the reverse of the Swiss flag. So it's a red cross on a white background versus the Swiss flag, which is a white cross on a red background. In 1921, I believe it is, that Kemal Ataturk of Turkey sought to gain admission to what was then the Red Cross movement. In doing so, he said, because in his view, the history of the Red Cross was a religious symbol to him. So he said, I want to join, but under a different symbol, which became the Red Crescent. That required an amendment or a modification of the Geneva Conventions to recognize the new symbol. At that time, or shortly thereafter, the Shah of Iran created another symbol, which is, help me, Muhammad, the red lion. Yes.
The Red Cross, but it's the lion.
It's the lion. And those were the symbols of the movement up until 2006, when the movement adopted a new symbol, which is colloquially called the red crystal. And it is, in fact, a crystal shaped. It's red. And that became, if you will, the legal means to enable admission of Magen David Adom, of Israel. Very much there were political reasons for MDA's exclusion, to be honest. It was not just about symbols, but it was a very artful compromise that enabled MDA to join from a legal perspective. And I'd like to, if I may, ask Dr. Al-Hadid, who, as you heard, is the chairman of the International Red Cross and Red Crescent Standing Commission, but also president of the Jordanian Red Crescent. And he, in fact, played a central role in crafting the compromise, not just over the symbol, but over the admission of both MDA and PRCS. And if I may ask Dr. Al-Hadid a question, what do you view as the critical success factors ultimately that achieved membership for both MDA and PRCS from your perspective?
Yeah, that is okay. That's fine.
Thank you very much. Can I answer the question first? Just give more details. You know, you said something about these religious symbols. They're not religious, because the Red Cross is the reverse of the Swiss flag, because the founder of the movement happens to be Swiss. So to honor this guy, we used back in 1859 the reverse of the Swiss flag, which is, you know, the Swiss flag, it's red with a white cross on it. The reverse would be a red cross on a white background. Now, this is not the religious cross, because Christians do know that the religious cross is not got equal sides. One, the vertical side is longer than the horizontal side. So what we're using is the reverse of the Swiss flag. Now, in 1873, the first time that the Red Crescent was used in the Crimean War between Russia and your other European countries, the Turkey used it, and they refused. They said, fine, you're using the reverse of your flag, we'll use the reverse of our flag, which happened to be a red crescent on a white background. Now, to us, to the Muslims, the crescent has no religious connotations whatsoever. You come to any Muslim, and the crescent doesn't mean anything to us. It was only mentioned in the Quran once, saying that the crescent is there to tell you the time of day for prayer and for pilgrimage, because the Muslims go with the lunar month rather than the other one. So back now in the middle in 1927, the Shah of Iran used the reverse of his flag. We have a red lion and sun. And when the Khomeini revolution and the Khomeini came into power, in June 1980, the Iranians, they gave up using the red lion and sun, and they said, we want to use the red crescent. So from 1980 until 2006, we only had two emblems in use, the Red Cross and the Red Crescent. We had to introduce another emblem, the red crystal, because we had to accommodate for national societies that found it difficult to use either the cross or the crescent. So we had the red crystal, which is used now by our Israeli counterparts. Now, when we talk about challenges and challenges in the Middle East or everywhere, the Red Cross, the American Red Cross today, they honored a couple of two wonderful people, very committed, very brave. They took decisions, and this is a way of, saying thank you to them because they really worked hard. But the challenges that remain on the ground is we have to change the mentality of people. These are the challenges. Between the two national societies, we don't have any problems. What we have is the politicians. And because we're not politicians, we're different. The Red Cross, Red Crescent societies, it's different from NGOs. We're not NGOs. The Red Cross is the Red Cross. What makes us different from the Red Cross is NGOs, they are based on national laws. The Red Cross, Red Crescent societies were based on national laws and international laws, the Geneva Conventions, international humanitarian law. So we're not NGOs. We are international relief organizations. We work during hard times. So what we have on our hand now, the challenge is not only for Yunus and for Ifraq, it's for everybody else or other national societies, like what Bonnie now is doing. We really have to put pressure on our governments to make sure that they respect the neutrality, the work that we are doing. Yes, it's great what Human Rights Watch and others are doing. It does help us because unlike them, we cannot go publicly and say, yes, we cannot criticize, we cannot take political move. This is what makes us special. We have to work, make sure that we access the vulnerable people, the victims, without interfering, asking questions. We don't care why this happened. It's like, in our last international conference, we talked about, climate change. When some governments were worried, the Red Cross want to talk about climate change. It's not the climate change or people have to sign this agreement or that. It was the consequences of climate change, how it affects people, and what should the Red Cross, Red Crescent be doing. So when we talk now, again, about challenges, main challenges ahead of us is to try and promote a culture of peace, a culture of understanding, a culture of tolerance. It's not enough just to leave it to us, It's also important to spread it around. And I want to, if you allow me, I want to finish with just a small story that, that was sent to me by a friend on the internet. The story goes about two patients in a hospital. One patient, they're both in the same room. One patient is staying, they're both unable to move, immobile, they cannot move, so nurses have to come and clean them, give them their medicines and so on. One is staying by the window and the other one right at the corner. The one by the window, he was describing to his colleague the wonderful world outside. He was describing that there was a parade walking with all women and children, and they have flags. And although the guy deep in the corner could not hear anything, but he was living every moment. He was really living, and because he could not leave his bed and see what is happening. Then the next day he would tell him that it is overlooking a pond and the ducks are swimming on the other side with their mothers and so on. And the guy used to get up every day just for those wonderful hours where his friend, his colleague could describe to him, what is happening. And he was giving him hope to live because he was, suicidal, and he had hope. Then one day the nurse comes in and she finds that this man, by the window, died in his sleep. So she covered him and they moved him, and he was so sorry that he left a very good friend. And he asked the nurse, please, can you move me next to the window? He wanted to be there. She said, fine. She moved him next to the window. And when he looked out of the window, there was a brick wall. There was nothing. And he wondered. He said to the nurse, "Why do you think this guy, he was telling me all these stories?" She said, "He gave you hope. And at least by telling this, he kept you alive and you're well," and so on. And this is what we should do. You know, in whatever position we are, we can make a difference in other people's life. And this is why today is called the present. The present is a gift. Today is a gift. And this is why it is called the present. And we have to really appreciate the world we are living in. And together, like Naum and Yunus and people like Bonnie and everybody else in the movement, by being together, we can make a big impact. Whether it's the Israeli government, the Palestinian government, I know we can win at the end of the day when we deliver and when we, provide services to the people that need us. Because in times of crisis, the first thing that comes to anybody's head, Red Cross or the Red Crescent. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our two speakers, David Metzer, Bonnie. Thank you for coming. Thank you for introducing us to the speakers. And thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks for